Hi, I'm Michael Swaine. I'm a senior research fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, working in the East Asia program. Before joining Quincy, I was nearly 20 years a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And before that, I worked at the RAND Corporation, all during which I studied primarily China-related security topics of various types. Now, if you look at how the domestic agendas or domestic situations of both China and the United States are influencing their bilateral relations, I think the influence is quite strong, particularly so on the US side, although I think it also exists on the Chinese side. Both countries are experiencing serious domestic problems of various types, and these problems tend to increase the tendency of leaders on both sides, politicians, leaders on both sides, to look for reasons why they're experiencing these problems. And oftentimes what occurs is pointing to some kind of external factor that is impacting the country, that is making it worse, that is challenging the leadership of each country, and therefore is creating domestic problems. In the United States, you have the domestic situation of social unrest of various types. All of these tend to make Americans less secure. They feel more insecure about their current situation, about their future, and this is really a fertile ground for people to use that insecurity and hype in a really excessive way the threat, the type of threat that China poses to the United States. You also have the problem that once you have this very harsh climate that exists in some ways in the United States, the administration itself, which seeks to have bipartisan agreement on various policies, it is intimidated to some degree. It is really affected in the ability to come out and push back against these kinds of views or to establish a more moderate type of position for itself. It's trying to do that in certain ways, but I don't think it does it nearly enough, in part because it's afraid of the domestic political implications and ramifications of not taking what is considered to be a sufficiently vigilant, sufficiently oppositional or confrontational stance towards China. So for all sorts of reasons, you have domestic politics working to influence the situation. On the Chinese side, you have something somewhat different. You don't have the kinds of differences within the senior levels of the government and the leadership that each side or different factions would play to and use the United States to do that. But what you do have is you do have domestic problems in China that confronts the entire regime. And for the regime, it needs to be sure that it has popular support. And sustaining popular support requires, to some extent, economic success and also a vision and an impression that it is standing up for China's nationalist interests overseas. And what that means is China takes a harder line position in showing its stance, its resoluteness in standing up for Chinese national interests. And so it tends to incline leaders to become more steadfast, more confrontational in when they're confronted themselves with what they see as US provocations. So that dynamic, domestically induced in part, is also working on the Chinese side. Both of these dynamics really are running in the wrong direction, undermining the ability of both sides to come to some meaningful dialogue with one another.